Hi. So, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. I am Ruth Guzman. I'm a retired university professor with environmental science as my field of specialization. From my long years in the academe and a rewarding teaching career of 45 years, it was very fortuitous and a happy event that I was then able to publish a book with Bibal. For this webinar, my co-author, my daughter, Dr. Ruth Marian Genuino, and I have chosen to elaborate on some topics of how to sustain our planet Earth through conservation and protection of resources. And we'll segue into a more specific case study on infectious diseases, which is a relevant topic of the times. Our book, entitled Environmental Science Towards a Sustainable Earth, actually is focused on how to protect, manage, and conserve our planet's environmental resources for the good of humanity, not only for the current, but also for the future generations. As the story of civilization unfolds, man has certainly altered the natural environment in an effort to gain human progress and development. Such alterations has resulted to overexploitation and in some cases, and irreversible damage to the environment and has ravaged our planet Earth. We have organized the book, by the way, into 3 units. This is, of course, our planet, our beautiful planet, and we aim to sustain it for all times. And this is the organization. We have 3 main units: the ecological concepts and environmental policies. And most of this will be under sound science, understanding the scientific principles, the environmental principles, the ecological concepts that form our ecosystems, and especially of our Earth, which is a giant ecosystem, and proceeds into the global and national environmental issues affecting the biosphere, which of course focuses on the interactions between living systems and the non-living systems, the life support systems that we have on climate, air, and energy, and of course how they impact on the conservation and management of natural resources, and of course with the population at large, the human population, which is of course a very big factor, the societal factor that environment provides for. And in the last unit, we focus on the strategies to keep our planet Earth more sustainable, which is the call of the times. And what are these strategies that affect environment and society, and going on to discuss the global and national initiatives towards achieving the goal of sustainable development and of course sustainability. So as I was saying, the 3 themes that underlie the book, is the undercurrent will be sound science and the principles, scientific principles, environmental principles, and of course what we need to emphasize, which is the stewardship by man on the resources provided to him by the universe, and how to sustain them so that it can serve the good of not only this current generation, but also for the subsequent generations to come. So, of course, it is already very, very obvious that human beings, although we are the most rational on earth, has not woven the web of life, but we are but a thread within it. So whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together and all things connect. And so this is what is being emphasized in the interaction between living and non-living components of the ecosystem, which is made up of living things, the non-living things, and they perform what we call ecosystem services, without which life on Earth cannot be possible. So life on Earth is a free-flowing series of activities that fall under either the supporting services, provisioning, regulating, and cultural services. And from these, we derive our human existence. And of course, that falls under it our need for personal security, personal safety, resource access, security from disasters. We derive from it our basic materials for good life, our livelihoods, nutritious food, shelter, access to goods. And of course, we have a more important component, the most important of which is how to sustain our health, strength, feeling well, access to clean air and water, and of course, our good social relations, which is a determinant of social cohesion, mutual respect, and ability to help others. All of this, of course, gives us the accessibility of all these perks that we have as a resident of the ecosystem, gives us all the freedom of choice. And then the opportunities for life that makes us therefore total human beings that are at peace and in harmony with nature. So for these ecosystem services, as I said, we explained here under the sound science theme, the basic ecological concepts of the ecosystem, and of course, tackled in Unit 1. And this segues into the important environmental principles that are part and parcel of understanding of what a good and sustainable ecosystem should be. Knowing, first of all, that all the resources on the earth, when we talk of resources, we talk of air, water, land, and all the food resources coming from plants and animals. They are all finite, including, of course, the one that drives all these processes, which is energy. And of course, these are all finite. That means to say they are limited. So we can only make use of them in the manner that they are being, as fast as they are being replenished. So we have to therefore be careful that we do not misuse or abuse it. And of course, the second is the balance of nature should always be maintained. So there's a homeostatic balance that prevails over our ecosystem. And this homeostatic balance is also dictated by the what we call the cycles of materials that are flowing in the ecosystem, energy that flows directly into the ecosystem from our primary source, which is the sun, and of course, the biogeochemical cycles, the little micro and macro environments that need to be there for maximum, realizing maximum potential of all living forms. And of course, also the other principle that all living forms are important and we are highly dependent and interactive with one another. This, of course, this interdependence of living and non-living systems together are therefore a major part of all these ecosystem services. And then, of course, the inevitability of change. No? These are things that we do not are not aware of, the changes that are happening every day in our lives. So starting from energy, for example, the change in energy, transformations of energy, they're all happening in the ecosystem right before us, but it is just a matter of things that we are unaware, but of course they show their effect in a cumulative manner. So in terms of human population, the world today is now around 7 billion, 7 billion. And of course, with the current pandemic, we are being decimated slowly by small percentage points day by day until the vaccine is discovered. And if you look at the graph, we have populations living in the developed countries and in the developing countries. But in the developed countries, you only have 18%, while the developing countries have 82%. But if you look at the resource use, how many of the resources that are available in the environment are being used? It's 80% being used by the 18% of the population, while only 12% is being used or is available to the 82% of the population living in the developing countries. This a huge discrepancy, has also impacts on, for example, the life expectancy. The life expectancy in developed countries is 77 years, while in the developing countries is 66 years. And more so evident in the distribution of wealth and income. So globally, in the developed countries, they own 85% of the global wealth, while only 15% goes to the developing countries. While in the production of pollution and waste, 75% of these is being produced by the developed countries, and only 25% in the developing countries. But the developing countries are also very much slower in the growth of their population, only 0.1%, while developing countries are at a 1.5%. This, if you look at the analysis of all these factors, you will see how lopsided it is for the advantage of the developed countries. But I think they also have a way, nature also has a way of reckoning. So maybe you will notice that in this current COVID times, the bulk of the infections have been in most of the G20 countries, the developed countries, starting with the US, the United Kingdom, and France and Germany, Italy. They actually belong to the G7 countries. So we don't know what the message is. All we know is that currently the world is on reset. We're trying to pause. And of course, we are already pursuing the holy grail of the vaccine, so that the pandemic will stop. But be that as it may, this is the situation at present. So there is a very big imperative on part of the whole global population to take charge and to take stock of what is happening, how this inequity is being tolerated, and how it can probably be solved. And we also need to be reminded that all of these ecosystem services are there, but as Mahatma Gandhi has said, the resources in our earth has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So because of also the goods and services developed through ecosystem services are the ones that form the infrastructure for our economy, it has also been a very lopsided economy. So we have already this division between developing and developing countries in terms of balances of trade. But it is also safe to warn that when all the trees have been cut down, when all the animals have been hunted, when all the waters are polluted, when the air is unsafe to breathe, only then will you discover that we cannot eat money. So, the second theme in the book is about stewardship. Therefore, the underlying theme of stewardship invokes the readers and the students that nature is beautiful and we are all stewards of God's creation. Maganda ang kalikasan at tayo ay tagapangasiwa lamang ng lahat ng gawa ng Diyos. If we have this kind of attitude, then we are able to take better care of our environment and the resources that are within it. That also serves our daily sustenance and achieves our goals also in our development objectives. And for stewardship to happen, this must be done under a spirit of cooperation. So there must be global initiatives as is founded in our third unit on the environmental protection and management to involve the concerted efforts of many people and sectors. Magtulungan ang lahat para sa inang kalikasan. And in order for the third theme to be pursued, which is sustainable development, which is sustainability, so that economic activities may be pursued without jeopardizing the survival of future generations and not at the expense of a degraded environment. So the degradation of our environment has had a long history. And for example, if we talk about specifically about our forest resources, we can see here that in the early 1900s, at the start of the end of the 19th century, no, or the start of the 20th century, we still had 70% of our forest cover in the Philippines. You see this all green portions, and a century later, in 1999, this was the imagery of the satellite image of the remaining forest cover in the country. I cannot see this. So this difference in the 1900s to 1999 loss of forest cover, knowing that forests are the climax ecosystems that we have, no, in the giant ecosystem that we have as the Philippines or the Earth, and of course in the Philippines. So this is also a picture in a global, a microcosm of the global picture, that forests have been ravaged for such a long time. But we pay our attention to the Philippines. Of course, we have a more serious situation in 2010, where only 6.6% remained. But of course, we can still recover them with efforts, no? With efforts to revegetate our country. And we have experienced the sad results from a denuded environment. From a denuded environment, then we can also experience how it has affected all of us with increases in disasters that are happening in the latter part of the, or in the early part of the 21st century, the floods, the landslides that we have, all because we already do not have the protective forest cover that is needed in order to have a balance in our ecosystem. A balanced ecosystem supposedly needs to have 60% forest cover so that all the ecosystem services in terms of provision of water, because forests are our watersheds, we get all our potable water from them. And of course, in terms of oxygen, release of oxygen, which is life-giving, these are all the things that we have been losing in terms of the gradual deforestation that we are experiencing. So it is a wake-up call when we see these images. We as teachers and students and other interested environmentalists can say that we need to do something more about this. And the same manner that how the kaingin, no? Kaingin that we have or the burning of our forests have also ravaged our land. And of course, this has a great effect, for example, in the current mother of all environmental issues, which is climate change, because we consider also forests as our lungs, the lungs of the earth. And with constant deforestation, we already deprive the absorption of carbon dioxide into them, so that the carbon dioxide stays in the air and is trapped and now produces our phenomenon of global warming. Global warming, therefore, driving the climate change phenomenon, because heat is trapped in the ambient air, and the carbon dioxide warms it more, and now we are experiencing a 1.5 degree centigrade increase in global temperature, and this is going to be disastrous in the long term. And for our forest ecosystems, we were talking about the forest ecosystems. Now we go to our marine ecosystems. You can see here the destroyed or the destruction of coral reefs, which is ongoing. And this is also catastrophic effects on our ecosystem in terms of its provision of food, provision of the protective functions of the coral reefs for our aquatic life, for our fishes. And all of these are being discussed and what strategies there are. So for example, we have to go into protection of all these ecosystems. For forest ecosystems, we have already in place some areas for protection. So we call them protected areas. In the Philippines, we have now a national integrated protected area system where some forests have been assigned as no-cut or permanent ecosystems, forest ecosystems that are strictly protected, and we only do some human activities in the buffer zones. And for aquatic ecosystems, we have also gone into the marine protected area strategy, so that we are able to allow some areas under strict protection to have unimpeded reproduction of aquatic life, and we only fish around the buffer areas, so that the spillover can be the ones caught, but not the supposedly the resource capital of all the fishes inside the marine protected area. So at least we're doing some things for the protection and conservation of our resources. And this is important because our population, our human population, is growing, and by the projection is that by 2084 we'll be approaching 10 billion. Of course, in the literature there is a varying prediction of what is the maximum potential of Earth. You know, our Earth is only one. We do not have a what we call a reserve planet, or when you say, if you have to call it planet B. So if there's a plan B, if you have a plan A, there is no planet B for us. So we have to provide for the future generations by, again, sustaining what is currently there. And with this kind of increase, we'll need to be more we'll need to be more resourceful and smarter in trying to still harvest what is needed, or to utilize what the resources are in the environment, so that this will still be within their carrying capacities. Carrying capacities meaning that you only produce for the specific number of people that is afforded by the unit area of land where the resources are found. So that is our carrying capacity. But because with the onset of technology, we can also try to make some provisions that there is an increase in the supply, but it will still be good for everyone. It will still be a balance, no, a balanced ecosystem with even the burgeoning population. But of course, maybe some interventions are needed, because as my daughter Ruth Marian will explain the next few minutes, the emergence also of infectious diseases, which are supposedly also a regulatory function of the ecosystem, has now been severely compromised. So, Maan?
Thank you, Dr. Ruth Guzman, also known as my mother. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ruth Genuino. So a little bit about my background. So I actually taught for about 9 years in the Institute of Biology in the University of the Philippines before coming to Australia to do my PhD, which I have just finished. I'm a reproductive immunologist by training, but as you can appreciate, I grew up in a family of environmentalists. So I ended up co-authoring this environmental science book with my mother. And so this afternoon, I wanted to complement Dr. Guzman's seminar on the importance of conservation and protection of natural resources, of the Earth's resources. Also, to a tangible example of the repercussions of the imbalances of dealing with with the Earth's resources. This is, of course, a very relevant topic nowadays because of all of that's happening in the COVID-19 scene. So, okay, let's start. So just a very brief background on population dynamics. So I'm assuming most of the teachers here or the students here appreciate these pictures, these graphs. So this picture talks about K selection and R selection. So K species are organisms that have long lifespans that reach sexual maturity. They have a larger body size. They reproduce later in life and produce few offsprings. Whereas R-selected species, such as seen in insects, typically have small body size. They reproduce early. They're highly mobile and have a short lifespan. So as you can imagine, the R-selected species exhibit a boom-bust pattern of growth, where in favorable conditions, they undergo tremendous growth, but in unfavorable conditions, growth is extremely inhibited. So what happens is they exhibit exponential growth, which is seen as a J-shaped curve here. Whereas the K-selected species, the bigger ones, which have fewer offsprings and reach sexual maturity, tend to have an S-shaped curve because when they reach this line over here, which represents the carrying capacity, then that means that the population stabilizes depending on the upper limit of this population size. So this carrying capacity, just to reiterate what my mom has mentioned a while ago, it's the theoretical maximum number of individuals of a given species that they can sustain indefinitely. So why are we talking about population dynamics? That's because humans have a very interesting population dynamic. So it's a very, very curious case. You can see here in this figure, okay, the history of population increase of humans actually resembles that of a J-shaped curve. So this part here is a J-shaped curve, or it represents exponential growth. And then as you reach here to this part from the 2020s, then you will see that the projected population exhibits more of an S-shaped curve, or logistic growth. So it's very interesting because over the last 4 centuries, population increase was relatively slow. In 1650, about 500 million people lived. And then the first billion threshold was reached within the next 200 years. And then 2 billion by 1930, and then 4 billion by 1975. Today, 2020, we are at 7.8 billion. Yes, so it's increasing approximately 80 million each year. That means about 150 babies are born every minute. So it's unimaginable, but that's the statistics at the moment. So the global population is still growing, although now it's slowed down. It's not as exponential. It's more of it's following more of a logistic growth now. It's stabilized at 1.1% annually, and they predict that by 2050 we would have a population of 9 billion people inhabiting the Earth. So what has led to this pattern of population growth in humans? So when you look at our history, actually identify the key events that have permitted humans to thrive on Earth and live as we do now. So each of these events are revolutionary in that they led to the improvement of living conditions, making it into the global population that exists today. So what are these revolutionary events? We have the Neolithic, or the agricultural revolution. That's when our ancestors settled down in one place, domesticated animals, found out that they can grow crops, they can grow plants, they did farming. So that enabled them to stay put in one place, create a village, and reproduce. The next revolution is the Industrial Revolution, which of course is harnessing the power, or harnessing energy to make technological advancements or improvements, and also become more efficient. So whatever manual labor, whatever skill or tool that used to be manual, you have to do it yourself. Humans have developed technological advancements such that machines can actually replace humans to do those things. The next one is the medical revolution, which is actually very significant because a lot of the deaths before this medical revolution, or before the advent of things like penicillin in 1928, a lot of deaths were attributed to diseases. So medical revolution, which would mean one is the development of medicines, and two is the improvement in sanitation. They realized that dirty sewages and unclean habitats can cause diseases, and an improvement over sanitation can actually improve the population growth. And then we have the Green Revolution and the Environmental Revolution, which I will not actually talk about. It's not as relevant here in this talk, but you can look at it in the book. Okay, so just two more terms. Charles Darwin, when he was developing his theory of evolution by natural selection, he recognized that in any species, more individuals are born than will survive to produce. If resources are unlimited and the conditions are favorable, then the number of offspring reaches a maximum. So this is the highest reproductive power, which could vary between organisms. And this is called the biotic potential, which is defined as the maximum rate at which a population could increase under ideal conditions. However, a number of facts which is collectively known as environmental resistance, are present, and they prevent populations from reaching this full biotic potential, and they prevent populations from growing explosively. So these environmental resistance factors include disease, predation, lack of food, drought, temperature extremes, and other adverse physical or chemical conditions. So yes, so environmental resistance basically keeps a population in balance. It's the restraints from nature that keep the population growth in check. So human population growth is closely linked to environmental problems of resource depletion. So humans, as we have seen throughout our history, we have a history of overuse, misuse, inappropriate use of resources that could result from a number of different factors like population pressure, mere ignorance of the workings of nature, tragedy of the commons, if you're familiar with that. Also our mental perspective of having a consumerist culture, always buying new, always buying stuff that is not recyclable, or like fast fashion or things like that. And also the mentality of humans that we dominate nature and that we are above rather than part of nature. So why am I talking about this? So that's because I wanted to relate all these concepts into what we are currently experiencing. So just a little quiz. Of course, my only participant here is my mom. so let's do the quiz. So guess the disease. So this one, obvious, it's a camel, and this is a virus. So this is about in 2012, I think, there was a spike in this disease. It's the MERS-CoV, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus. And the vector for the coronavirus for this is the camel. That's why. This figure here, this picture here shows gametocytes of Plasmodium falciparum, which is a protozoan that is a causative agent of malaria. Okay, so that's malaria. This one here, sorry, I keep doing that. This one here is an influenza virus. This one you might have seen about 10 years ago, always flashing on our TV screens, because it's the causative agent of the pandemic flu, the pandemic swine flu in 2009. This on the top, on the upper right, you have the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is of course a vector for a lot of viral diseases such as Zika fever, chikungunya, the dengue fever, and the yellow fever viruses. And of course, this last bit here is the one that you see every day in the news, and that would be, this virus would be the SARS-CoV-2, which is the causative agent for COVID-19 disease. So why am I sharing this? It's because the emergence and the re-emergence of infectious diseases is intrinsically linked to what we are doing to our environment. So the World Health Organization warned in 2007 that infectious diseases were emerging at a rate that has not been seen before. About 40 infectious diseases have been discovered since the 1970s. And this includes, of course, from the top of your head, you can already think of all these diseases. You have SARS, you have MERS, you have Ebola, you have chikungunya, avian flu, swine flu, and most recently, Zika. So this is actually quite alarming because historically we have avoided all these infectious diseases in the past through improvements of sanitation and medical advancements, but now they're coming back. So with people traveling much more frequently in far greater distances than in the past, and they live in more densely populated areas and coming into closer contact with wild animals, it increases the potential for emerging infectious diseases to spread rapidly. So the term emerging infectious diseases refers to diseases of infectious origin whose incidence in humans has either increased within the past 2 decades or threatens to increase in the near future. What are the factors that underlie emergence and prevalence of these infectious diseases? So some result from natural processes, such as the evolution of pathogens over time, but many are a result of human behavior and practices. So we have to consider here the interaction between human population and the environment, especially in the last century. As you have seen in the previous figures, population growth has increased exponentially. So that means a lot of people are occupying a lot more people are occupying a space, a particular area. There's a lot of migration happening, maybe from rural areas to the cities. Again, increasing the population in a certain place. International air and travel and commerce have become commonplace. There's poverty, wars. It could be biowarfare, such as what happened with the anthrax, and destructive ecological changes due to economic development and land. Put here some pictures. For example, here, the living conditions in an overpopulated area. Here, the conversion of wildlands into economic development, international travel and air. And then here, further interacting or getting animal or bush meat, for example, which is this photograph is actually very interesting because chimps are attributed, or eating bush meat from chimps have been attributed with the emergence of HIV. So many emerging diseases arise when infectious agents in animals are passed to humans. So this is what we call the zoonosis. So here, this is a simple figure showing that a lot of different animals serve as reservoirs or vectors of viruses. So for example, here we have the migratory birds who are vectors of avian influenza, monkeypox. You have the chimpanzee as the reservoir for Ebola virus. So this is a big deal nowadays, because as the human population expands in number and into new regions, so humans will come into close contact with animal species that are potential hosts of infectious agent infectious agent. When that factor is combined with increases in human density and mobility, this could be a deadly combination. It could pose a serious threat to human population. So a very good example of the variety of hosts would be the influenza virus. So as you can see here, they can thrive, or different kinds of influenza viruses, different strains of influenza viruses can thrive in different hosts. So we have the cattle, we have the seal, the ferrets, the quails, the swines, the humans, the whales, cat, tiger, or chickens. So theoretically, or in principle, the influenza viruses, if they are kept just within the host animals, they should be harmless. It's when they actually cross over to humans or to other organisms such as pigs and birds that they could be quite deadly, because they don't have the immunity for it just yet. That's what happened in the 2009 H1N1 swine flu pandemic, where a triple reassortment of bat, bird, and human genes were found in the strain of H1N1. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more and bring it back to the environmental context. So environmental factors such as agriculture, irrigation, deforestation, these are important determinants of emerging infectious diseases. There's urbanization and urban sprawling, which has a tendency which will likely encroach in agricultural lands and semi-natural areas. And this is seen in many other places. So one consequence of habitat destruction is the displacement of wildlife, sometimes into urban or abandoned environments. So this displacement of wildlife is what the animals that are affected will tend to migrate to other areas and to increase the chances of interfacing with humans. And of course, international trade and travel can also facilitate the dispersal of vectors and pathogens to new areas that are increasingly climatically and environmentally suitable. So as you have actually seen firsthand what happened to the SARS-CoV-2, that the first epicenter was in Wuhan, but it's gradually spread throughout the globe. And now it's all over, literally around the globe. And of course, in the SARS-CoV-2 scenario, what the origin is actually the natural host is still not definitive. It could be from bats, it could be from pangolins. It's still not definitive. A lot of science is still going on there. But yeah, so it could very well be a case of human encroachment. And okay, so this is the last slide. And this is just to illustrate the drivers of infectious disease. There are four major factors: the physical environmental factors, which which Dr. Guzman has extensively discussed a while ago. We have the genetic and biological factors, which is the ability of these pathogens or these microorganisms to evolve and to adapt and to spread. We have the ecological factors, which would be it's quite alarming because as you can imagine, climate change is increasingly becoming a concern. The Earth's climate is slowly warming up, and this alters the habitats, and diseases can spread into new geographical areas. For example, the warming temperatures in some areas would allow mosquitoes and, of course, the diseases that they transmit to expand their range into regions where they previously have not been found. And lastly, you have the social, political, and economic factors, which, of course, is what we is an avenue that we can actually take part in. And yeah, so that ends my presentation. And basically, what I wanted to uncover in this presentation is the fact that we have some control over what happens or over the emergence or reemergence of infectious diseases, and that we should do our part in taking care of the environment. And over to you, Mom.
Sorry. Okay. With that as a very, very illustrative example of how we have actually rocked the boat, no? For humans to have rocked the boat so hard in our journey on this earth, we see that the only way out is really for us to master the principles that will lead us to more sustainable ways of living. So, for example, in this last slide that we have, there's the book which has the three underlying themes. The third one is towards sustainability, and one of the more viable alternatives for sustainability to happen is to practice for populations to practice sustainable consumption and production. So where can we do this? So like, for example, in waste management, how do you do sustainable consumption and production? Then of course we go to the for example, in policy making, we now have waste that is being managed through ecologically. That means to say we are into recycling for the residuals, and for the biodegradable, we are into composting. So that is how we manage waste. We give back to earth what is due it. And for the recycling to happen, so that we save more resources to being produced into goods, into more goods. And then we have sustainable resource management. That's for all the ecosystems that we have. What are the resources that we have? We have the water, so we save water. We have our forest. We save our forest. We take care of it. We protect them. We design for sustainability, the D4S program that, for example, has been manifested in the current preoccupation, for example, of architects to go into green design. So we now have, you can even see in some buildings, there is a seal of approval when you see it is being marked as LEED. That's very, very sustainable. So cleaner production and resource efficiency, how to be more efficient in using up resources. Sustainable transport, and you can see why, for example, in Manila now, the policy of the government is to go for the jeepneys that will replace the more pollutive forms of transportation that we have, the jeepneys, with a more modern engines that will decrease the emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions that is being spewed into the air. And of course, this is also a part of compliance of our commitments, international commitments towards climate change in the Paris Agreement, where we are supposed to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions by so much. We already determined them by how many percentage, and we have to stick to it, so that there is now really a strong drive. I mean, before the COVID came in, that there was a move to really replace all our old jeepneys with more sustainable transport. Then, of course, eco-labeling and certification. This is how we are going to go about it in terms of pushing more products that are produced sustainably, and to certify them so that consumers who are well aware of the impact of resources and waste material on the environment will always opt for a more eco-labeled products. Then, of course, sustainable procurement, marketing, and of course, sustainable lifestyles. And of course, this covers a wide area of possibilities where our students, our readers, the public can actually participate. So here we have our practices of, for example, using more eco-friendly devices, more eco-friendly practices. Like, for example, we can bike or walk instead of using our cars, or using transportation that only emits carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So all of these are being explored as avenues, so that in order for the earth to breathe more happily, so to say, and we have a lighter footprint, ecological footprint on our planet. So in conclusion, although human needs and demands from the Earth's resources are almost insatiable, we realize that our planet's resources, however, is finite. So we need to strike a careful balance between supplying human and economic needs vis-a-vis natural resources available within the ecosystem's carrying capacities. As when these carrying capacities overshoot, it could be really tragic for the planet. The environmental concerns arising from the unsustainable use of natural resources must be addressed through concerted efforts of man through sustainable consumption and production. So we can even go back to the basics such as sustainable agriculture, like maybe what the Neanderthal men did. Well, that's far from it. Ideal, however, would be a green economy focused on environmental risks and ecological scarcities by using energy more efficiently and managing natural resources more responsibly. Thus, this will provide a resilient economy, a green economy that provides a better quality of life for all within the ecological limits of the planet. To end our seminar, we leave this takeaway that we need to protect a natural capital for us to sustain our planet. And this augurs well for the three underlying themes that are fully discussed in our book, which is sound science, stewardship, and sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. And I think we're now open for questions. Okay, so from Heidi Karandang, ibig sabihin po ba we really need to push family planning?
You take it.
Okay, so you actually, for you to have an informed opinion of that, you have to have a view of the global picture. So population growth is not, in developing countries such as in the Philippines, we can really feel that we can really feel the brunt of that, because we have extremely limited resources for a burgeoning population. However, on the other side of it, or in the other end of the spectrum, you have the developed countries who are actually struggling to have their populations go up. So it's not, there's a lot of different factors that are at play for this. In principle, if we are only looking at the use of, or the improvement of life, or the quality of life, then yes, a lower population or fewer people will get to enjoy the resources that we currently have. However, in the global context, there's a lot of economic factors at play that would influence this. So there's no definite answer for that question, but more of an invitation or an encouragement for people, for teachers and for students who are tuned in this talk, to examine what those economic factors are and how we can contribute to positively to this.
May I add to that? The issue of family planning is a quite a tricky one, because there are others who, if you're an ecologist, you bat for more population. If you're an ecologist, you bat for less population so that you can have better balance with the carrying capacity. But if you're an economist, then you bat for higher population, because a bigger population is more human capital. It's more human capital.
Yeah, so I suppose the answer would depend on what your interests, what your interests, where your interests lie. So Doc Marian, if we follow Darwin's law of natural selection, is the COVID-19 pandemic and environmental resistance? Definitely. So as I said, these environmental resistance factors, these are like checks on the population. These are a massive wake-up call. What's happened in this COVID-19 scenario is a massive wake-up call for us to not ignore all of what's happening in the environment, of all the negative impacts of humans to the environmental resources, to the Earth's resources, to be more aware of the impact of our actions. And yes, emerging diseases and re-emerging diseases are a direct consequence of that. What can you say about the theories of scientists about one of the reasons of COVID-19 is because of rapid population growth and eating of wildlife animals? So as I've previously mentioned in the slides, so one of the main factors for emerging zoonosis, which would be the infectious agents that are naturally hosted by animals, and most likely these would be wild animals, is because of population of humans coming into more frequent contact with these animals. So the blurring lines between the separation of humans and wild animals and the interfacing of these two worlds is increased. The chances of this is increased by rapid population growth. So yes, so that may be one of the reasons why there is an emergence of diseases such as the COVID-19. Now, for the eating of the wildlife animals, there are a lot of examples throughout history. So as I've mentioned in the slides, when I projected the picture of a chimpanzee, so that is a picture of bushmeat trading. So the meat that you get from the chimpanzees or any simians like the apes and the gorillas, that's called bushmeat. And so the AIDS HIV studies have traced the HIV virus as originating from the bushmeat that people would eat. How can we combat these diseases if the bacteria, viruses, parasites are evolving? Considering that people always use antibiotic and other medicines, my prof said that the pathogen became immune. From Hinata Hyuga. Okay, so there's a reason why everyone is actually staying at home at the moment. And that's because we are in a race. We are in a race to beat virus. And what that means is that we are in a race to control the transmission, first of all, the transmission of the virus, and the number two, to contain the adaptation and the evolution of the virus. So it is true that a lot of pathogens have it's a very scary scenario. So what you've mentioned before is it's called antimicrobial resistance, and this has been seen in a lot of different scenarios. Like for example, in malaria, the first set of the medicines, which would be the hydrochloroquines, which is kind of famous at the moment, has been shown to be to not work anymore with malaria, especially the Plasmodium falciparum, because it has developed a resistance to hydroxychloroquine. And what's more scary is that a few years or after a decade or two, there was a discovery of a new compound that could combat malaria. It's called artemisinin. But then only after 8 to 10 years, there was a study showing that malaria or Plasmodium falciparum has already developed a resistance to this. So as you can see, it's a neck-to-neck race. So these pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasites, they are very, very smart. They're living organisms. They're actively evolving. They're actively adapting. So it's a race between these pathogens and humans.
And that is why biologists never get out of a job. They'll never get out of a job.
We'll always have
We'll
something.
have something to do. We'll always have something to do.
Okay, a question from Lourdes Santawana. Doc, do you agree that to stop depletion of Earth's resources, the government should stop mining and the people should be vegetarian? Thank you.
For you see, we're talking of the government here. When we're talking of the government, we're talking also of people and how they provide for the society. So, for example, in the Philippines, we have pushed for what we call responsible mining, and this responsible mining takes into consideration that there is also an economic gain to be had from responsible exploitation of our resources, because we do have them here, the mining resources that we can convert into our converted assets and to help us in the development efforts as a country. So I think that is already the stance of the government to have responsible minings, and it is embedded in a proper legislation. We already have the Mining Act, and it has been amended several times, so that also there will be the benefits from the mining activities will also flow back to the people, especially in the hinterlands, where the tribal communities where usually the mining concessions are found. And to the aspect on if people should be vegetarian, it's actually an individual decision, as long as people are made aware of what the benefits are and what risks and benefits are in adapting a certain lifestyle. Then of course there are pluses and minuses, no, when you try to balance, where if you totally opt to be vegetarian, how long would you sustain that? What are your intended objectives? So it's actually an individual decision. But of course, for the environment, as you said, if you go back to the basics, then a vegetarian diet could be an alternative. But also, because when you say vegetarian, you totally exclude sources of animal protein. But in a healthy, harmonious ecosystem relationship, there is also what we call the food web, where the vegetation is actually fodder for the next food level, which is the animals, the plant eaters, which are they eat herbage like your cattle, and so in a way you can also get benefit because they are eating plants. So it's actually for you to determine what your line of action will be. Thanks.
So there is a question here. How can we apply or relate the revolutionary events in the new normal scenario? So that's a really good and relevant question, actually. Because so let's take let's again enumerate.
This is from Michelle Neri.
From Michelle Neri. So let's again reiterate the different revolutionary events. First, we had the agricultural revolution, and then we had the industrial revolution, and then the third is the medical revolution. So these three all led to the burgeoning of the population, of the global population of humans. The next one is the green revolution, which is basically the pursuit of humans to provide more food for everybody. So that's agricultural advances, green, like for example, creating a more nutritious kind of rice or nutritious kind of corn, and a more pest resistant kind of crop. And the last one is the environmental revolution, which is the call for sustainability, which is what we are actually doing now. So it's a very relevant question in that, first of all, we go back to the medical medical revolution, that we have to re-examine. We have to again rely on our capacity to harness technology in order to contain a certain disease. But also at the same time, it underscores the importance of the last revolution, which is the environmental revolution, which basically is that we relate everything that's happening to the negative impacts that we have caused to the environment. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, because actually this is going back to the basics. If you have to go to the previous revolutions, and you will notice that in these current lockdowns, you actually realize you can do without so many things.
True.
It becomes there becomes a moment that you in this quarantine period, well, we can do without it. We can do
For
without
example, what I've mentioned a while ago is that we have this, humans seem to have an insatiable appetite for consuming things. More clothes, more bags, more shoes,
it. More cell phones.
more cell phones, everything, more and more and more, acquiring more and more properties, and not necessarily thinking of the consequences in terms of waste, and in terms of its impact, the impact of buying more stuff in terms of environmental resources that it uses up. So this is if it's a recalibration, if you will, for people to think, to be more conscious and be more aware of their actions.
Yeah. So can we have the next one?
From Glenn
Glenn
Abonales.
Abonales. As an educator and concerned citizen, how can we encourage those people who are less fortunate to take part in making the sustainable community happen? I guess this is from an educator himself. So Glenn, I think the efforts will need to be sustained to educate. And this is going to be a challenge for every educator to make environmental education part and parcel of the integrated educational system. It's a happy development that in the K to 12 curriculum, which is the currently being implemented, they have already given way to what we call as greening the curriculum and integrating the practices that are needed in order to have a sustainable community. And also, since policymakers are also involved in trying to make a significant impact in trying to push for this environmental practices, like for example, we have been quite successful in some cities. We already are banning plastics. For example, in supermarkets, you have to bring your own recyclable bag. So we have to start with, we have to be be able to contend with small victories like this, and we can add up to one big victory later of trying to make a bigger portion of the public more environmentally literate.
Do your part.
Do your part, yes.
So, from Estelita Ikan, can you have a part 2? Can you have a part 2 of related topic in this seminar, not only for the teachers, but for all the people around the earth.
For the public, you mean?
I don't think that's for us to answer. You can ask your Vibal.
Oh,
okay.
thank you.
Thank you so much. We're seeing some comments from Karina Anog and from Ronaldo Agustin Sr. Thank you very much.
From Karina, Anog, and
Ronaldo
Ronaldo
Agustin.
Agustin. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your comments.
We appreciate it, and we hope we could have a chance again to. It all depends
Yes, that's true.
on programming.
And Maria Teresa C. Ramos and Grace Morales, thank you also for your comments. Yes, we agree. Everybody has a part in taking care of our environment. Remember, we are not above nature. We are part of nature. So yes, we agree, definitely. We really need to be responsible stewards of our environment.
Thank you also for the comments of Maria Leia Fadjalan. This is a timely discussion. Yes, we agree, because we also made it more relevant because of this pandemic that we are experiencing now. And
it's also the reason why my mother is here with me.
I'm stranded here. So we really need to be responsible stewards of our environment. The stewardship component of our life should never end. Should never end. It should always be with us and ingrained in our psyche and values. From Katrina Joy Sabay, thank you also. We appreciate your comments for the sharing of knowledge this morning, this afternoon, and the experiences we shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
God bless too.
God bless everyone. You may have your last challenge to the
for you there is a probably takeaway challenge so that we can see some changes when you get out of this webinar for the viewers to do.
Yes. So I hope that this seminar have made you aware of, have made you more aware, if you're not already aware, of the negative impacts of humans to the natural Earth's resources and the repercussions of it, which would be, an example would be the emergence of infectious disease such as COVID-19. So I guess challenge.
Yeah. Maybe on the part of infectious diseases, maybe less meat, less wild meat.
No, please don't eat anything that is wild. It is not for you to eat. I suppose, yeah. So because hopefully you're more aware now that wild animals can be natural hosts or reservoirs of viruses or potential pathogenic microorganisms. Then maybe please do not encourage eating wild animals. And these wild animals, of course, you can still eat animals.
just avoid the wild ones.
Just not the wild ones.
They have to be tamed first, domesticated. Yeah. And for my challenge, maybe because we have shared a little knowledge sharing this afternoon with each other. And of course, from hearing, we bring it to cognition. It becomes part of our cognitive knowledge. But that cognitive knowledge is nothing if you don't put it into action. So we have to translate our knowledge into viable actions that will be helpful for the environment. So my challenge could be for everything that we have heard
this afternoon, we can translate it to one doable action. So everybody here can resolve to do one environmental friendly practice each day, and one sustainable practice each day. Like for example, when you brush your teeth, to save water, use glass. And when you take a shower, use less water.
No to single-use plastic.
No to single-use plastics. So these are things that we can do. Segregate your waste. That's a very important part that we can do in order to sustain our environment. Even just a simple way of segregating our biodegradable from our non-biodegradable products, because we are returning to earth what it direly needs, no? The minerals that are being decomposed, we are putting it back to earth as fertilizers. So there are a myriad of things that we can do so that we can actually lighten our burden on our, we can, what we might say, tread lightly on this earth so that our earth will not be so overburdened. Because as we said earlier, there is no planet B. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for
very much for a very
listening
fruitful discussion
and for watching.
and for watching.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.